The story you are about to hear contains frightening facts. When you listen until the end, you may be psychologically affected for a few days. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel for more. Angela and Barry, best friends since high school, had always shared a dream: to save enough money to buy a caravan and go on a grand vacation. Working tirelessly at a bustling bar in the heart of the city, they finally saved enough to make their dream a reality. The sleek white caravan they purchased was their ticket to freedom, a promise of adventure away from the chaotic urban life they knew so well. After weeks of meticulous planning, they finally decided on a remote forested location, perfect for an escape into nature. Excitement coursed through their veins as they packed the last of their belongings into the caravan, ready for their long-awaited journey. Early one summer evening, they clocked out of their shifts for the last time before their vacation. The neon lights of the bar flickered behind them as they drove off into the night, their laughter filling the car as they sang along to their favorite songs. The thrill of the open road, the wind in their hair, and the promise of adventure kept their spirits high. They drove through the night, the cityscape gradually giving way to open highways and eventually to dense, towering forests. The early morning sun cast long shadows as they reached a fork in the road, turning off onto a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. The forest seemed to envelop them as they drove further, the canopy above creating a dappled pattern of light on the ground. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of leaves reminded them of the wildlife hidden in the trees. The road became rougher, and the caravan bounced along the uneven path. They chatted excitedly about their plans: hiking, stargazing, and simply enjoying the tranquility of nature. But as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, their excitement turned to concern. The caravan shuddered and lurched to a halt, refusing to move any further. "What the hell?" Angela muttered, glancing at Barry with a worried expression. They both stepped out and opened the hood, staring blankly at the engine. Neither of them knew much about car mechanics, and the jumble of wires and metal parts might as well have been a foreign language. Angela fiddled with a few things, but nothing happened. The forest around them grew darker as the sun set, casting eerie shadows across the ground. The silence of the forest felt oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. "I think we should just wait until morning and call for help," Barry suggested, her voice tinged with anxiety. Angela nodded in agreement. They decided to push the caravan under the shade of a large oak tree and settle in for the night. The thought of spending a night in the middle of a forest was unnerving, but there wasn't much else they could do. They locked the doors and windows, crawled into their sleeping bags, and tried to sleep. Despite their exhaustion, the unfamiliar sounds of the forest kept them on edge, every creak and snap outside magnified by their unease. Barry was the first to drift off, but Angela lay awake for a while, staring at the ceiling of the caravan. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though she knew it was probably just her imagination. Eventually, fatigue won over her fears, and she fell into a restless sleep. Outside, the forest seemed to come alive with nocturnal activity. Unseen creatures moving through the underbrush, the wind whispering through the leaves, and the occasional hoot of an owl echoing in the distance. In the dead of night, Barry awoke with a start. She sat up, her heart pounding. She had heard something, a soft crunching sound outside the caravan. She glanced at Angela, who was still fast asleep, and quietly got up to investigate. Barry crept to the window and peeked out, her breath catching in her throat. There, in the dim moonlight, stood a man wearing a white mask. The mask was devoid of any features, just two dark holes for eyes. He was standing unnaturally still, staring directly at the caravan. Barry's scream pierced the silence of the night, waking Angela instantly. "What? What is it?" Angela exclaimed, scrambling to her feet. Barry pointed a trembling finger towards the window, but when Angela looked out, the man was gone. "He was right there," Barry insisted, her voice shaking. Angela tried to calm her down, but a sense of dread settled over them both. They checked all the windows and doors again, ensuring everything was locked. The rest of the night passed in tense silence, neither of them able to sleep. When the first light of dawn crept through the windows, Angela and Barry stepped outside cautiously, There was no sign of the masked man from the night before, but the ground around the caravan was disturbed, as if someone had been walking around it. Barry's heart sank at the sight, and Angela's face turned pale. They needed to get the caravan fixed and get out of there as soon as possible. Angela tried the engine again, but it sputtered and died. With no cell service in the area, they were truly stranded. Deciding to explore their surroundings, they hoped to find a nearby house or someone who could help. They packed a small bag with essentials and set off down the narrow path they had driven up the day before. The forest was thick, and the path soon became overgrown, making it hard to follow. As they walked, an uneasy silence hung in the air, broken only by the crunch of leaves underfoot. The trees seemed to close in around them, and every rustle of leaves made them jump. After walking for what felt like hours, they stumbled upon a small clearing with an old, dilapidated cabin in the center. Relief washed over them, and they approached the cabin cautiously. It looked abandoned, but it was worth checking out. The door creaked loudly as Angela pushed it open, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the cabin was dark and dusty, with broken furniture and debris scattered across the floor. It was clear no one had lived there for a long time. Despite its condition, the cabin provided a brief respite from the oppressive forest. They sat down to rest, their nerves frayed from the events of the previous night. As they caught their breath, Barry noticed something strange on the far wall, a series of markings etched into the wood. She got up to take a closer look, and her blood ran cold. The markings were crude drawings of a masked figure, the same mask they had seen the night before. Angela joined her, and they both stared in horror at the drawings. "What does this mean?" Angela whispered, fear evident in her voice. Barry shook her head, unable to find the words. The discovery made them even more desperate to leave the forest. They decided to search the cabin for anything useful, hoping to find tools or something that could help them fix the caravan. As they rummaged through the decaying furniture, Angela found an old, rusted toolbox. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. They took the toolbox and left the cabin, eager to get back to the caravan before nightfall. The walk back seemed longer and more treacherous. The sun was already dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across their path. They hurried, but the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent their hearts racing. They reached the caravan just as the last light faded, plunging the forest into darkness. Angela immediately set to work, trying to use the tools to fix the engine, but her hands were shaking too much. "Come on, Angela, you can do this," Barry encouraged, trying to keep her voice steady. Angela nodded, taking deep breaths to calm herself. She managed to make some adjustments, and with a silent prayer, she turned the key. The engine roared to life, and they both let out a sigh of relief. Without wasting another moment, they hopped into the caravan and started driving. The path was barely visible in the dark, but they didn't care. They just wanted to get out of the forest. As they drove, the headlights barely penetrated the thick darkness. The narrow path seemed to stretch on forever, and the oppressive silence was only broken by the hum of the engine. Barry kept glancing out the window, half expecting to see the masked man standing there. The further they drove, the more their fear began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of relief. They were almost out of the forest, almost free from the nightmare that had begun with a simple road trip. But just as they thought they were safe, the engine sputtered and died again. Panic set in as Angela tried to restart it, but the engine refused to turn over. "No, no, no, not now," she cried, pounding the steering wheel in frustration. They were still deep in the forest, far from any help. The darkness seemed to press in around them, and the familiar feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. Barry grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, determined to figure out what was wrong this time. Angela followed her, and they opened the hood again, trying to see what had caused the engine to fail. As Barry held the flashlight, Angela noticed something strange. A piece of cloth caught in the engine. She pulled it out and realized it was part of the same white fabric as the mask. Her heart raced as she showed it to Barry, who looked equally terrified. "He's been here," Barry whispered, her voice barely audible. They quickly closed the hood and got back into the caravan, locking the doors once more. Inside, they huddled together, trying to come up with a plan. The forest seemed to close in around them, and every noise outside felt like a threat. "We need to stay awake," Angela said, her voice firm. "We can't let our guard down." They took turns keeping watch, but exhaustion eventually overcame them both. Barry dozed off, and Angela fought to keep her eyes open. Just as she was about to succumb to sleep, a loud bang on the side of the caravan jolted them both awake. They looked at each other, fear etched on their faces. The bang was followed by a scraping sound, like nails on metal. Angela grabbed the flashlight and shone it towards the noise, but the beam of light revealed nothing. The sounds continued moving around the caravan. It was as if someone or something was trying to get in. They huddled together, their minds racing with fear. Suddenly the scraping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. The growl was followed by heavy footsteps, circling the caravan. Barry's hands shook as she clutched Angela's arm. They both knew they couldn't stay inside forever, but the thought of facing whatever was outside was paralyzing. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment there was silence. Then a loud crash as something hit the caravan with immense force, rocking it on its wheels. Angela screamed, and Barry covered her ears, trying to block out the sound. The impact was followed by more growling and scratching. They realized with horror that the masked figure wasn't alone. There were multiple creatures outside. Desperation took over, and Angela grabbed the toolbox, clutching a wrench as a weapon. "We have to fight," she said, her voice shaking but determined. Barry nodded, grabbing a screwdriver. They waited, hearts pounding as the noises grew louder. The creatures outside seemed to be testing the caravan, looking for a way in. Just as they thought the walls would give way, the noise abruptly stopped. The silence was deafening, and they held their breath, waiting for the next attack. Minutes passed, feeling like hours, but nothing happened. Slowly they crept to the windows and peered outside. The forest was eerily still, with no sign of the creatures or the masked man. They waited a while longer, but the silence persisted. Finally, they dared to hope that whatever had been out there was gone. Exhausted and on edge, they decided to make one last attempt to fix the caravan. Angela's hands shook as she worked, but this time, the engine roared to life without any trouble. They didn't question their luck. Instead, they jumped in and sped down the path, desperate to leave the forest behind. As the first light of dawn broke through the trees, they finally reached the main road. The sight of the open highway brought tears to their eyes, and they didn't stop driving until they were far from the forest. They eventually found a small town and pulled into a gas station. The attendant looked at them with concern as they stumbled out, disheveled and shaken. They recounted their ordeal to the local sheriff, who listened with a grim expression. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "That forest has a dark history. People go in, but they don't always come out." Angela and Barry exchanged a haunted look, vowing never to speak of the masked man and the creatures again. They returned home, grateful to have survived, but the memory of that night would forever haunt them, a reminder of the darkness lurking just beyond the safety of the familiar.
To hear more suspenseful and chilling stories like this one, please consider supporting my channel by subscribing and liking the video. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you!